A lawsuit seeks to halt Biden's lawless $400 billion student loan bailout. So, President Biden's plan to forgive up to $20,000 in federal student loan debt per borrower was hit with its first major lawsuit Tuesday, just a day after the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimated the bailout would cost taxpayers $400 billion. The Libertarian Pacific Legal Foundation filed the suit in an Indiana federal court on behalf of one of its attorneys, Frank Garrison, who argues that the loan forgiveness would force him to pay a hefty state tax bill. The lawsuit asks for an injunction halting the executive action, which could affect up to 43 million people beginning next month. Nothing about loan cancellation is lawful or appropriate, the lawsuit says. In an end run around Congress, the administration threatens to enact a profound and transformational policy that will have untold economic impacts. The administration's lawless action should be stopped immediately. Garrison will face immediate tax liability from the state of Indiana because of the automatic cancellation of a portion of his debt. The 17-page filing adds, these taxes would not be owed for debt forgiveness under the congressional authorized program rewarding public service. Biden announced the massive loan forgiveness plan. What the hell happened? Okay, yeah. Biden announced the massive loan forgiveness plan on August 24th, outraging critics who argued it was illegal and could worsen inflation, which already is at its highest rate since 1981, amid elevated federal spending. Actual litigation over the bill has been slow to materialize due to trouble finding someone with a legal standing to sue, meaning an argument that shows that they are directly harmed by the action and therefore have a right to challenge it. Under Biden's plan, borrowers are eligible for forgiveness of up to $10,000 in federally owned student debt if they have an annual income under $125,000. And Pell Grant recipients are eligible for another $10,000 in forgiveness. And about 8 million people are expected to receive the benefits automatically, while the rest will need to apply. Asked about the lawsuit Tuesday afternoon, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that Garrison could simply opt out of the write-off plan. No one who does not want that relief will have to get that debt relief, so folks have an option to opt out, Jean-Pierre claimed. But Garrison is eligible for $20,000 in debt cancellation and is in the class of automatic cancellation during the first week of October 2022, according to his lawsuit. And by the way, another way to look at it is that you can't really opt out, because if this does end up basically getting, progressing through, you're going to have to pay the taxes. Meaning, you're going to have to pay other people's bill through your taxes, through your hard work. So it gets kind of interesting when you think about it. So the filing adds that the administration has created new problems for borrowers in at least 6 states that tax loan cancellation as income, and that certain people will actually be worse off because of the cancellation. As of Tuesday, the Pacific Legal Foundation was aware of just one other lawsuit in connection with the plan filed in Idaho with a standing claim that Biden's action will increase inflation, which it will. There's literally no way that this will not cause more inflation. And to be frank, this is basically one of the worst times to do something like this. Also, how can you try to cancel student loan debt while still giving student loan debt? That's pretty stupid. So, Steve Simpson, a senior attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation, said in a statement that canceling student debt is unjust to those who have paid their loans or never took any. It will only lead to more calls for government intervention in education at taxpayers' expense. Biden invoked emergency powers to authorize the loan forgiveness following a pressure campaign from the Democratic Party's left wing, saying the COVID-19 pandemic meant he had a right to waive the debt. However, the president appeared to undercut his own justification for the handout earlier this month when he said in a 60 Minutes interview that the pandemic is over, before any loans actually were forgiven. In a memo justifying the loan forgiveness plan, the Education Department's legal department cited a 2003 law that allows the president to alleviate hardship for student loan recipients during a national emergency. The thing is, there is no national emergency in this country at all. So the new lawsuit argues that the 2003 law was passed in response to the Iraq War as a means of providing assistance to veterans and their family, and specifies as relevant here that this waiver or modification must be necessary to ensure that one of certain statutory objectives are achieved, including to ensure that recipients of student financial assistance are not placed in a worse position financially in relation to that financial assistance because of their status as affected individuals. The CBO's Monday estimate that Biden's loan forgiveness would cost $400 billion provoked another round of Republican criticism. This isn't constitutional. A president can't just give away $400 billion, tweeted Rep. Thomas Massie in response. Joe Biden isn't canceling student loan debt, he's just forcing us to pay for it, wrote Abigail Marone, a spokeswoman for Senator Josh Hawley. Now here's the thing. This is actually probably the most accurate statement that the whole phrasing of canceling student debt isn't true. You're basically moving that debt onto the shoulders of literally every American citizen that pays taxes, right? Which is just so absurd. Just so absurd. Imagine if you were to do this with, like, say you had like a car loan payment. Now everyone in the country has to pay your car loan payment. Like, it just doesn't make sense. It's just stupid. The CBO estimated that Biden's additional August decision to defer payments and interest accrual on student loans through December would cost taxpayers another $20 billion. And the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget said the CBO actually underestimated the costs because it didn't account for another part of Biden's plan that caps repayment on undergraduate loans at 5% of a person's earning, down from the current 10%. The group projected in August that the so-called income-driven repayment IDR policy would cost taxpayers another $120 billion. The University of Pennsylvania's Penn Warren budget model estimated last month that Biden's debt cancellation alone will cost $519 billion, while the postponement of payments would cost another $16 billion, and the lower repayment rule would cost $70 billion. Depending on the future IDR program details to be released and potential behavior changes, total plan costs could exceed $1 trillion, the Penn Wharton estimate said. And I think the biggest thing that scares me about this whole situation is that it will not take that much more for this country's currency to basically be worthless right away. Now, typically, the United States currency loses its value in terms of like buying power, like every 100 years or so. Like it gets like it basically loses like 99% of its buying power. But with all these really massive plans, without actual any planning done with it, this could cause the country to basically be in a situation where we get into like hyperinflation, where basically the purchasing power of a single dollar is basically nothing, right? Where you need like $1 million to buy like a gallon of milk. Like that's scary to me, right? Because the only people in that situation that would survive are one, people that could leave the country, two, people that own a lot of assets, so stocks, real estate, businesses, that sort of stuff, right? Because if you don't, you're basically 100% screwed in that situation. So let's see some of the comments if there are any. Yep, there are. Most people won't remember what the federal takeover of the student loan scheme was used by Obama to pay for Obamacare. Who knew that debt forgiveness would have to be factored in? Seriously, if Donald Trump were to have done this, the Dems would have had a friendly federal judge issue an injunction before the ink on the EO was dry. Just another instance of Republicans being too little, too late. Personally, I think a lot of Republicans simply do not have like a spine attached to them. Like that's my personal view. I think a lot of Republicans are spineless, and I think a lot of Democrats are either stupid or they literally do not care about what happens to the country. Great. I'm a senior and military veteran. Before the government gives millennials, Generation Zs, and whoever else public welfare under the guise of education loan forgiveness, do you think we can get optometry or podiatry coverage added to Medicare? It's shocking that with the stroke of the executive pen, a U.S. president can spend a $500 billion, that's what it will eventually be, potentially a trillion or over, of unappropriated money that does virtually no good, does inestimable and irreparable harm, inflation anyone, is clearly a vote buying exercise, and also intended to placate the shrillest voices on the far left, and there's virtually nothing anyone can do about it, in Congress or elsewhere. I sure hope courts find this guy and others similarly situated, legally speaking, have the standing necessary to sue and that the suit prevails. So 4 billion will balloon to 2 trillion. But hey, since we were talking about not honoring contract laws, can I forget about paying my mortgage? No loan forgiveness. The gal I know who has student loan debt went to college for 8 years. She lived in nice apartments and had a new car every 2 years. She wore designer clothes, shoes, purses. She got her doctorate degree and is not even using it. So glad my wife and I worked hard to make sure that our daughters finished college without debt. Now, Biden expects me to pay for college for someone else's kid. Pay your bills, deadbeats. Seriously, you knew what you were getting into when you signed the paperwork. You made a promise, a commitment to pay your debt, honor it. See, now this is probably the biggest thing to me, right? Is like for a lot of the people that ended up getting these student loans, they agreed to take on these loans, right? They agreed to that. But there's going to be hundreds of millions of people that did not agree to pay other people's student loans who are now going to be potentially forced to pay people's loans, right? And like I said, I mentioned this earlier. This is basically like the equivalent of you getting a car loan for a brand new car, knowing this car loan is like $60,000. You basically have no job to pay for this car. And by the way, now, since you can't pay it, everyone else is going to have to pay your car loan. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, it's just so screwy. And again, one of my biggest issues, which I mean, this one's like more like a moral ethical issue, but one of my biggest issues is like, I think it is so absurd that the government is trying to, in quotes, cancel student loans while still giving out student loans. Like it's just going to be becoming this like cycle of like, oh, we're going to give people debt, a lot of debt, a lot of debt. Then we're going to buy their votes by getting rid of their debt. Years later, if we're struggling, oh, then we're going to cancel their debt again, and then we're going to give them more debt, and then we're going to cancel their debt again, and so on and so on and so on. It's just going to be such an annoying process. By the way, if you want to learn how to get out of debt and master your money so you don't rely on the government to wipe your own butt, go down below or go to 41box.com.